My name is Serafina, I'm 28, and until 3 months ago, I thought I knew exactly who I was in my family. I was the middle child who tried too hard, the one who never quite measured up to my perfect older sister Delilah or my charming younger brother Mason. But at my cousin's engagement party last summer, when I overheard my parents whispering to my aunt about how they wished Delilah was their only child, everything I believed about blood loyalty shattered. What I discovered next didn't just destroy my family, it exposed a web of lies that had been carefully constructed for nearly 3 decades, turning me from the family disappointment into the architect of their downfall. Before we dive into this family revenge story that'll make you question everything about loyalty and justice, tell me, where are you watching from today? If you're ready for a wild ride full of shocking betrayals and the sweetest karma payback you've ever heard, smash that like button and hit subscribe, because this story has more twists than a pretzel factory, and trust me, you won't want to miss how this family drama ends. Growing up in suburban Connecticut, the Morrison family looked picture perfect from the outside. My father Richard was a successful corporate lawyer who never missed a little league game or school play. My mother Patricia was the epitome of a devoted wife and mother, always volunteering at school events and hosting elaborate dinner parties. Our colonial-style house with its manicured lawn and white picket fence screamed American dream achieved. But inside those walls there was always an invisible hierarchy that I never quite understood until recently. Delilah, 2 years older than me, was the golden child who could do no wrong. She was valedictorian prom queen, full scholarship to Yale, and now a successful pediatric surgeon married to another doctor. Everything she touched turned to gold, and our parents never missed an opportunity to brag about her accomplishments to anyone who would listen. Then there was Mason, 4 years younger, the baby, who charmed everyone with his easy smile and natural charisma. He was the star quarterback, student body president, and somehow managed to get away with everything from sneaking out to throwing parties when our parents were away. He was studying business at Stanford on a partial athletic scholarship, and our parents talked about him like he was destined for greatness. And then there was me, Serafina, the middle child who seemed to exist in a permanent state of trying to prove herself worthy of the same love and attention. I wasn't stupid. I graduated summa cum laude from Boston University with a degree in journalism. I wasn't unsuccessful. I worked as a senior editor at a respected digital magazine. I wasn't irresponsible. I'd been financially independent since college, and had even helped Mason with his tuition when his scholarship didn't cover everything. But somehow, nothing I did ever seemed to measure up in their eyes. When Delilah got engaged, it was a 3-week celebration with engagement parties and dress shopping expeditions. When I got engaged to my college boyfriend Jake 2 years ago, my mother's first comment was, "Are you sure you're ready for such a big commitment?" When Mason made the dean's list, they framed the certificate and hung it in the living room. When I won a National Journalism Award, they mentioned it briefly at dinner, and then spent the rest of the meal discussing Delilah's latest research publication. I told myself it didn't matter. I convinced myself that their obvious favoritism was just a quirky family dynamic, something I'd laugh about in therapy someday. I made excuses for them, rationalized their behavior, and buried my hurt deep enough that I could function at family gatherings without screaming. The engagement party for my cousin Rebecca was supposed to be a joyful celebration. She was marrying her college sweetheart, and our extended family had gathered at my Aunt Linda's beautiful lakeside home in New Hampshire. It was one of those perfect summer evenings where the sunset painted the lake in shades of gold and pink, and everyone was in high spirits. I had driven up from Boston with Jake, who was working late and would join us the next day. Delilah was there with her husband Michael, both of them glowing from their recent return from a medical conference in Switzerland. Mason had flown in from California, regaling everyone with stories about his internship at a Silicon Valley startup. The party was in full swing when I went inside to help my aunt with the dessert. That's when I heard it, my parents' voices drifting from the kitchen window where they stood outside with my Aunt Linda. They thought they were alone, and their words cut through the summer air like a knife through my chest. Honestly, Linda, my mother was saying her voice, carrying that particular tone she used when she thought she was being profound. Sometimes I wonder how different our lives would have been if Delilah was our only child. She's everything we dreamed of in a daughter. My father's voice joined in, agreeing in that measured way he had when discussing legal strategies. Patricia's right. Delilah never caused us a moment's worry. She's successful, married to a wonderful man, and she'll give us beautiful grandchildren. She's the daughter every parent dreams of having. And Mason, my mother, continued, well, he's our miracle boy, so charming and ambitious. He's going to change the world someday. There was a pause, and I held my breath, waiting for them to mention me to balance their praise with anything positive about their middle daughter. Instead, my Aunt Linda asked gently, what about Serafina? She seems to be doing well with her career. The silence that followed was deafening. Then my father cleared his throat in that way he did when he was about to deliver bad news to a client. Serafina is fine, he said finally. She's always been the difficult one, though. Always questioning everything, always making things more complicated than they need to be. Honestly, if we're being truthful, our family would have been so much more peaceful if it was just Delilah and Mason. My mother's agreement was swift and cutting. She's never quite fit in with the rest of us, has she? Always so dramatic, so needy for attention. I love her, of course, but sometimes I think she resents her siblings' success. It's exhausting, really. Standing there in my aunt's kitchen holding a stack of dessert plates while my parents casually discussed how much better their lives would be without me, I felt something inside me break. Not just break, shatter completely like a window hit by a baseball. The hurt was so profound that for a moment I couldn't breathe. But then, as I stood there listening to them continue their conversation about how difficult and dramatic I'd always been, something else emerged from the wreckage of my broken heart: anger. Cold, calculating anger that burned away the tears before they could fall. I set the plates down carefully, my hands surprisingly steady, and walked out of that kitchen with a new mission. If my parents truly believed their family would be better without me, then maybe it was time I stopped trying so hard to earn their love and started looking for answers to questions I'd never dared ask. The first question that had always nagged at me was how different I looked from the rest of my family. Delilah and Mason both had my father's dark hair and my mother's green eyes. They were tall and lean with sharp aristocratic features that photographed beautifully. I, on the other hand, had honey blonde hair that my mother always claimed came from my paternal grandmother, hazel eyes that shifted between brown and green, and a softer, more rounded face. I was shorter, curvier, and had always felt like I was looking at my family through a window rather than being truly part of it. My parents had always brushed off these observations with vague comments about recessive genes and family traits skipping generations. But as I drove back to Boston that night, leaving the party early with some excuse about work deadlines, I couldn't stop thinking about genetics, family resemblances, and the nagging feeling that had followed me my entire life. Jake found me at 2 a.m. sitting at my laptop with a cup of cold coffee and a notebook filled with scribbled questions. He'd driven up from Boston after finishing his project, expecting to find me asleep. "Sarah, what are you doing up? How was the party?" I looked up at him, this man who loved me unconditionally, who saw value in me that my own parents couldn't see, and made a decision that would change everything. "Jake, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Do you think I look like my family?" He sat down across from me, his expression growing serious as he recognized this wasn't a casual question. Jake was a forensic accountant, trained to notice discrepancies and follow paper trails. His analytical mind was one of the things I loved most about him. "Honestly, I've always thought you looked different from them. Not in a bad way, you're beautiful, but you definitely have different coloring and bone structure." "Why?" I told him everything. The conversation I'd overheard, the years of feeling like an outsider, the nagging doubts that had always lived in the back of my mind. As I spoke, I watched his expression shift from concern to something harder, more determined. "Sarah, have you ever seen your birth certificate?" The question hit me like a physical blow. In 28 years, I had never needed to see my birth certificate. My parents had handled all my documentation for school, sports, college, applications, even my passport. They'd always said they kept all the important papers in their safe deposit box for security. "No," I whispered. "I've never seen it." Jake was quiet for a long moment, then he reached across the table and took my hand. "I think it's time you got some answers. Real answers." The next morning I called in sick to work and drove to the Connecticut Department of Public Health. Getting a copy of my birth certificate was surprisingly simple: a form, an ID, and a $20 fee. The clerk handed me the official document like it was nothing more than a grocery receipt, but to me it felt like holding dynamite. My hands shook as I read the information. Child's name: Serafina Rose Morrison. Date of birth: the 15th of March 1995. Place of birth: Hartford Hospital, Hartford, CT. Mother: Patricia Ann Morrison. Father: Richard James Morrison. Everything looked normal, official, legitimate. But something about the document felt wrong. As someone who worked with documents professionally, I knew what to look for, and there were subtle irregularities in the formatting. Slight variations in the font. Tiny details that suggested this wasn't an original birth certificate but, rather, a very good reproduction. I spent the next 3 weeks diving deep into public records, using every investigative skill I'd learned in journalism school and refined in my career. I pulled court records, hospital records, adoption records, anything I could legally access. What I found made my blood run cold. There was no record of Patricia Morrison giving birth to a child on the 15th of March 1995 at Hartford Hospital. None. No admission records, no discharge records, no billing records. According to the hospital's database, Patricia Morrison had never been a patient there. But here's where it got interesting. There was a record of Richard Morrison visiting the hospital on the 16th of March 1995, the day after my supposed birth. But not in the maternity ward. He'd been in the legal department signing papers related to what was listed only as family court proceedings. I was adopted. But more than that, my adoption had been carefully concealed, my birth certificate falsified, and my entire identity constructed around a lie that my parents had maintained for nearly 3 decades. The question was, why? The next phase of my investigation required skills I didn't have, so I hired someone who did. Marcus Chen was a private investigator. Jake recommended a former police detective who specialized in family cases and had a reputation for being both thorough and discreet. When I walked into his cramped office above a Chinese restaurant in downtown Boston, I had no idea I was about to uncover a story that would make every family drama I'd ever heard seem like a fairy tale. Marcus listened to my story without interruption, occasionally taking notes in a small leather notebook. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and studied me with the kind of intense focus that made me understand why he'd been successful as a detective. "This is going to be expensive," he said finally. "And once we start digging, we can't undig what we find. Are you sure you want to know the truth?" I thought about my parents' words at the party about a lifetime of feeling like I didn't belong. About the fake birth certificate and the lies that had shaped my entire existence. I'm sure. What Marcus uncovered over the next 6 weeks was so much worse than I had imagined. My birth mother was named Elena Vasquez, a 17-year-old high school student from Hartford, who had gotten pregnant by her boyfriend Michael Torres during their senior year. Elena came from a struggling single-parent household. Her mother worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat, and Elena was determined to finish school and go to college despite her circumstances. When Elena discovered she was pregnant, she made the difficult decision to place the baby for adoption. She wanted her child to have opportunities she couldn't provide, to grow up in a stable home with parents who could offer everything she couldn't. Through a private adoption agency, she connected with Richard and Patricia Morrison, a successful couple who had been trying to have children for 5 years. But here's where the story takes its first dark turn. Richard and Patricia weren't just any prospective adoptive parents. Richard was a lawyer who specialized in family law and had connections throughout the state's legal system. Patricia, desperate for a child after multiple miscarriages, had developed what the case files described as an unhealthy obsession with creating the perfect family image. The adoption should have been straightforward, but Elena had one request that Richard and Patricia found unacceptable. She wanted to maintain some contact with her child. Not joint custody or regular visits, but perhaps letters, photos, and the possibility of meeting when the child turned 18. It was a reasonable request that many birth parents make and one that adoptive parents often honor. Richard and Patricia refused. They wanted a closed adoption with no possibility of future contact. When Elena hesitated, threatening to choose different adoptive parents, Richard made a decision that would haunt multiple families for decades. Using his legal connections and knowledge of the system, Richard orchestrated an elaborate deception. He convinced Elena to sign papers that she believed were temporary custody agreements while she thought things over. Instead, they were permanent relinquishment documents buried in legal jargon. By the time Elena realized what she had signed, the adoption was finalized, and Richard had used his influence to have the records sealed so thoroughly that they would be nearly impossible to access. But it gets worse. Elena, devastated by the loss of her child and the deception, tried to fight the adoption. She hired a lawyer and filed appeals, but Richard's connections in the legal community meant that her case was repeatedly dismissed on technicalities. The stress and legal battles took their toll on Elena's mental health, and she eventually moved to California to start over. Meanwhile, Richard and Patricia took their new daughter home and immediately began constructing the lie that would define my life. They falsified the birth certificate, created fake hospital records, and told everyone that Patricia had given birth to me after a difficult pregnancy that required extended bed rest. They were so committed to this fiction that they had convinced even their closest family members that I was their biological child. But the most devastating revelation was yet to come. Marcus had tracked down Elena, who was now Elena Torres, married to her high school boyfriend Michael, and living in San Diego with 3 children, my biological siblings. Through careful investigation and eventually a conversation with Elena herself, Marcus learned the truth about why Richard and Patricia had been so desperate to hide my adoption. 2 years after adopting me, Patricia actually did get pregnant naturally. That pregnancy resulted in Delilah. 4 years later, she had Mason. My parents had desperately wanted biological children, and when they finally got them, I became what Patricia privately called their practice child, a placeholder who had served her purpose. Elena had never stopped looking for me. She had hired investigators over the years, but Richard's legal maneuvers had kept her from finding any trace of what had happened to her daughter. She had 3 children who knew about their older sister who had been adopted, and she had kept a box of letters and photos she had hoped to share with me someday. The final piece of evidence Marcus uncovered was a series of emails between Richard and Patricia from 6 years ago, recovered from an old laptop Richard had donated to charity without properly wiping the hard drive. In these emails, they discussed whether to tell me the truth about my adoption, and their conversation revealed the depth of their deception and manipulation. Patricia had written, "I don't see why we need to complicate things. Serafina is settled, and telling her now would only disrupt everyone's lives. Besides, she's never really fit in with us anyway. Maybe it's better if she doesn't know." Richard's response was even more chilling, "I agree. The legal complications alone would be a nightmare. Elena could try to establish a relationship, and I won't have that woman disrupting our family. Serafina may not be ours biologically, but legally she's our responsibility until she's independent. After that, what she doesn't know won't hurt her." They had discussed my adoption like I was a legal liability they were managing rather than their daughter they loved. As I sat in Marcus's office reading through the evidence he had compiled, I felt something I had never experienced before, a rage so pure and focused that it felt like a physical force. These people had stolen me from a mother who loved me, lied to me for 28 years, treated me like a second-class family member, and then had the audacity to discuss how their family would be better without me. But now I had something they didn't know I possessed, the truth. And I was going to use it to give them exactly what they said they wanted, a family without me in it. But first I was going to make sure they understood the full cost of their lies. The old Serafina would have confronted my parents immediately, demanding answers, and probably dissolving into tears when they inevitably tried to gaslight me into believing their version of events. But the woman who walked out of Marcus Chen's office that day was someone entirely different. Someone who had inherited her birth mother's determination and her adoptive father's strategic mind, forged into something Richard and Patricia Morrison had never seen coming. I spent 2 weeks planning my approach, and the beauty of my plan was its simplicity. I wasn't going to destroy them through elaborate schemes or public humiliation. Instead, I was going to give them exactly what they said they wanted, but on my terms, with consequences they hadn't considered. First, I needed to connect with my biological family. Marcus had provided Elena's contact information, but reaching out to a birth mother who had been searching for her daughter for 28 years required delicate handling. I crafted a letter that explained who I was, what I had discovered, and my desire to meet her if she was willing. Elena's response came within hours, and reading it was like finding a missing piece of my soul. She wrote about the day she gave birth to me, how she had held me for 2 hours and memorized my face, how losing me had shaped every day of her life since. She told me about my siblings, Maria, 25, a teacher, Carlos, 23, a social worker, and Sofia, 20, a college student studying environmental science. She included photos spanning the years, showing a warm, loving family that had always had a space waiting for me. We arranged to meet in New York City, neutral ground between Boston and Hartford. The moment I saw Elena in the coffee shop we had chosen, I knew I was looking at my biological mother. We had the same hazel eyes, the same laugh lines, the same way of gesturing with our hands when we talked. For the first time in my life, I was sitting across from someone who looked like me. Elena cried when she saw me, but they were tears of joy mixed with decades of grief. She told me about the life she had imagined for me, the adoptive family she had researched and trusted to give me opportunities she couldn't provide. When I told her the truth about how Richard and Patricia had treated me, her expression shifted from sorrow to anger. "I chose them because they promised you would be loved," she said, her voice shaking. "I sacrificed my relationship with you because I believed you would have a better life. And they made you feel unwanted." Michael, my biological father who had come with Elena to meet me, was quieter but equally angry. He told me they had married 2 years after I was born and had always talked about their first daughter who was living with her adoptive family. My siblings had grown up knowing about me, hoping to meet me someday. "We want you to meet them," Elena said. "Only if you're ready, but they've been waiting their whole lives to meet their sister." Meeting Maria, Carlos, and Sofia was like stepping into an alternate universe where I had always belonged. They welcomed me with open arms, shared stories about the sister they had imagined, and made me feel more accepted in 4 hours than I had felt in 28 years with the Morrisons. This was what a loving family looked like: messy, loud, affectionate, and unconditionally supportive. But I wasn't ready to transition into my new life until I had closed the book on my old one. And I had the perfect opportunity coming up: Delilah's birthday party. Every year, Richard and Patricia threw an elaborate celebration for Delilah's birthday. This year was her 30th, and they had planned a garden party at their house for 50 guests, including extended family, colleagues, and friends. It was going to be their typical display of how perfect their family was, how successful their children were, and how blessed they were to have such a wonderful life. I RSVP'd that I would attend, and I spent the next 2 weeks preparing. I hired a professional photographer who specialized in family events, someone who could document everything that was about to happen. I prepared copies of all the evidence Marcus had uncovered, organized in folders for easy distribution. And I wrote 3 letters, one to Delilah, one to Mason, and one to my extended family. Most importantly, I arranged for Elena, Michael, and my siblings to be nearby. Not at the party that would be too much drama too quickly, but close enough that they could meet my adoptive siblings if Delilah and Mason wanted to process this revelation with their biological sister present. The morning of the party, I received a text from my mother. "Please try to look presentable today, Serafina. Delilah's colleagues from the hospital will be there, and we want to make a good impression." Even now, even at what she didn't know would be our last family gathering, Patricia couldn't resist a subtle dig about my appearance. It was the final confirmation I needed that I was doing the right thing. I arrived at the party looking better than I had in years. I'd gotten my hair professionally done, bought a beautiful dress that made me feel confident, and carried myself with the poise of someone who knew exactly who she was and what she was worth. Several family members commented on how radiant I looked, which seemed to annoy Patricia, who had clearly expected me to fade into the background as usual. The party proceeded exactly as I had anticipated. Delilah was the center of attention, graciously accepting congratulations on her recent promotion to department head. Mason regaled everyone with stories about his startup success. Richard and Patricia basked in the praise for raising such accomplished children. I played my part perfectly, smiling and nodding, helping serve drinks, and complimenting Delilah on her achievements. To everyone watching, I was the same Serafina, who had always tried too hard to fit in with her perfect family. But I was waiting for the perfect moment, and it came during the gift opening ceremony. As Delilah unwrapped expensive presents, and everyone cooed over each thoughtful gesture, I stepped forward with my gift. "Delilah," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the garden, "I have something very special for you. Something I think everyone should see." The gift I handed Delilah was beautifully wrapped, but inside was a leather portfolio containing copies of every document Marcus had uncovered. Every piece of evidence that exposed the truth about my adoption and our parents' deception. I had arranged the materials chronologically, telling the story from Elena's pregnancy, through Richard's legal manipulation to the recent emails discussing how much better their family would be without me. Delilah opened the portfolio with her usual gracious smile, expecting perhaps a photo album or a heartfelt letter. Instead, her expression shifted from confusion to shock to horror as she read the first document, Elena's original letter, expressing her desire to place her baby with a loving family who would allow some future contact. "Serafina," she said quietly. "What is this?" The garden had fallen silent 50 guests, sensing that something significant was happening, but not yet understanding what. My photographer moved discreetly around the edges of the gathering, capturing every moment as I had instructed. "Those are the adoption papers that made me your sister," I said, clearly my voice carrying to every corner of the garden. "Documents that show how our parents stole me from my birth mother through legal deception and then spent 28 years lying to all of us about who I really am." The silence that followed was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop as 50 people processed what I had just said. Then the chaos began. Mason pushed forward, grabbing the portfolio from Delilah's trembling hands. As he read, his face went white. "This can't be real," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "It's all real," I confirmed. "Elena Vasquez, now Elena Torres, is my biological mother. She lives in San Diego with my biological father and my 3 siblings who have been waiting 28 years to meet me. She never stopped looking for the daughter who was taken from her through fraud and legal manipulation." I turned to face Richard and Patricia, who were standing frozen near the gift table. Patricia's face had gone completely white while Richard's expression had shifted into the cold, calculating look he wore in court. "Mom, Dad," I said, using those titles one last time, "would you like to explain to everyone how you obtained my falsified birth certificate, or should I tell them about the emails where you discussed how much better your family would be if I didn't exist?" Richard stepped forward, his lawyer instincts kicking in. "Serafina, this is neither the time nor the place for this discussion. These are private family matters." That private I interrupted, my voice rising. You've spent 3 decades parading me around as your biological daughter while treating me like a second-class family member. You've let me struggle with feeling like I didn't belong, like I wasn't good enough, like there was something fundamentally wrong with me. And all the while, you knew exactly why I felt that way, because I'm not actually part of this family. Aunt Linda, who had organized cousin Rebecca's engagement party where I first overheard my parents' devastating conversation, stepped forward. Richard, Patricia, is this true? Is Serafina adopted? The question hung in the air like a challenge. I watched my parents' faces, seeing them calculate their options, weighing their responses. Even now, caught red-handed with irrefutable evidence, they were looking for a way to spin this to maintain control of the narrative. The circumstances of Serafina's adoption are complicated, Richard said carefully, but she has always been our daughter in every way that matters. Except for the way that actually matters, I shot back. Love. Acceptance. Treating me like I belong here, instead of like a burden you're managing. I pulled out my phone and played a recording I had made of myself, reading the most damning email exchange between my parents. The one where they discussed how their family would be more peaceful without me. As their own words echoed across the garden, describing me as difficult, dramatic, and someone who never quite fit in, the gasps from our guests were audible. Delilah, who had been reading through more of the documents, suddenly looked up with tears in her eyes. Sarah, I had no idea. I swear to you, I never knew you were adopted. If I had known, Mom and Dad felt this way. It's not your fault, I told her, and I meant it. You and Mason are victims of their deception too. You've spent your whole lives thinking I was your biological sister, and they let you believe that, while systematically undermining my place in this family. Mason, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. The college tuition, he said slowly. When I needed help with expenses and you gave me that money, Mom and Dad told me not to tell anyone you had helped me. They said it would make you feel bad to have people know you were struggling financially. But that wasn't true, was it? They didn't want people to know I had accepted help from your adopted sister, who they were hoping would eventually fade out of your lives, I finished for him. Patricia finally found her voice, but it came out as a desperate whisper. Serafina, please. You're our daughter. We raised you. We love you. No, I said firmly. You managed me. You tolerated me. You kept me around because legally you had to, but emotionally you checked out years ago. And I finally understand why I never felt like I belonged here, because you never wanted me to belong here. I gestured to the photographer, who handed me a tablet showing some of the photos he had just taken. Images of shocked faces of family members reading the documents of Richard and Patricia, looking cornered and exposed. I'm going to give all of you the same gift my parents gave me, I announced to the gathering. The truth. Every person here is going to receive copies of these documents, so you can all understand the real story of the Morrison family. How they stole a baby from a teenage mother who trusted them, how they falsified documents to hide their crime, and how they spent decades emotionally abusing that child for having the audacity to exist in their perfect biological family. The crowd was buzzing now, guests talking among themselves, some approaching to ask for more details, others backing away as if the drama was contagious. Several of Delilah's medical colleagues looked particularly disturbed, clearly recognizing the ethical implications of what they were hearing. Richard made one last attempt to regain control. Everyone, please. This is a family matter that should be discussed privately. I'm going to have to ask, you're going to have to ask what I interrupted. These people to pretend they didn't hear what kind of man you really are, to ignore the fact that you built your perfect family on fraud and child theft, to continue pretending that your reputation matters more than the lives you've destroyed. I turned back to address the entire gathering. I want you all to know that I've found my real family. My biological mother, Elena Torres, is an amazing woman who has spent 28 years wondering if the daughter she loved enough to give up was happy and safe. She's going to be devastated to learn that the family she chose for me treated me like an unwanted burden. I paused, looking around at faces I had known my entire life. Family, friends, relatives, people who had watched me grow up, always wondering why I seemed different from my siblings. But here's the beautiful part of this story, I continued, my voice growing stronger. Elena didn't just lose me when Richard and Patricia stole me from her. She went on to build a beautiful family with my biological father, Michael. I have 3 siblings who have been waiting their whole lives to meet me, and parents who actually wanted me from the moment I was conceived. I reached into my purse and pulled out a family photo. Elena had given me a recent picture of her Michael, Maria, Carlos, and Sophia at Sophia's college graduation. This is my real family. These are people who look like me, who share my values, who welcome me with open hearts, instead of treating me like a problem to be managed. The effect of the photo was immediate. Even from a distance, guests could see the family resemblance that had been missing from every Morrison family photo ever taken. The aftermath of Delilah's birthday party was swift and decisive. By the end of that week, Richard Morrison's law practice was under investigation for the fraudulent adoption documents, and Patricia had been asked to step down from her position on the hospital foundation board. Their carefully constructed reputation crumbled as quickly as their lies were exposed. But the real reckoning came from within the family itself. Delilah called me 3 days after the party, sobbing over the phone as she apologized for years of unconsciously participating in my marginalization. She had read every document in the portfolio and had called Elena to personally apologize for what our parents had done. "I need you to know," Delilah said through her tears, "that I always thought something felt off about how they treated you, but I told myself I was imagining things. I should have spoken up. I should have defended you." Mason's call came the next day. He was angry not at me but at the realization that he had been manipulated into accepting special treatment while watching his sister be systematically diminished. "They made me complicit in hurting you," he said. "I don't know how to forgive myself for that." I told both of them what I told everyone who reached out to apologize: they were victims too. Richard and Patricia had manipulated all of us, creating a family dynamic where love was conditional and favoritism was the norm. Delilah and Mason had been raised to see themselves as the real children, while I was gradually positioned as the outsider. None of us had chosen that dynamic. Elena had driven up from New York to be nearby during the confrontation, and the day after the party I introduced her to Delilah and Mason. Watching my biological mother embrace my adoptive siblings, while tears streamed down all their faces, was one of the most healing moments of my life. Elena thanked them for loving me when our parents couldn't, and they thanked her for giving me life and for being strong enough to search for me for so many years. "Your sister is remarkable," Elena told them. "She survived something that could have broken her, and she emerged stronger and more compassionate than the people who tried to diminish her. You should be proud to call her family." The legal consequences for Richard were severe. The State Bar Association opened an ethics investigation that resulted in his suspension from practice. Several of his high-profile clients terminated their relationships with his firm when the adoption fraud became public knowledge. But more than his professional downfall, Richard lost something he valued even more: his reputation as a pillar of the community. Patricia's fall was more social than professional, but no less devastating for someone who had built her identity around being the perfect wife and mother. Their country club asked them to resign their membership. The charity boards she had served on quietly removed her from their committees. Friends who had envied their seemingly perfect family began avoiding them at social events. The most satisfying part, though, was watching them face the consequences of their own words. "Remember how they'd said their family would be better without me? They got exactly what they claimed to want." I changed my name legally to Serafina Torres, moved to California to be near my biological family, and built a life that didn't include the people who had spent 28 years making me feel unwanted. But karma had a few more lessons to teach the Morrisons. 6 months after the truth came out, Mason was offered an incredible job opportunity, but it required a thorough background check that included family references. When his potential employer discovered his family's adoption fraud, they rescinded the offer, citing concerns about ethical standards and family values. Mason had to move back home to Connecticut and take a much less prestigious position while he rebuilt his professional reputation. Delilah faced her own consequences when her hospital's ethics board opened an investigation into whether someone from a family involved in adoption fraud should be treating vulnerable children and families. Though she was ultimately cleared of any wrongdoing, the investigation damaged her standing among colleagues and delayed a promotion she had been expecting. Richard and Patricia found themselves isolated, facing the reality that their actions hadn't just hurt me, they had damaged their relationships with their biological children and destroyed their social standing. The perfect family they had been so desperate to protect no longer existed. Meanwhile, my life in California was everything I had never dared to hope for. Elena and Michael welcomed me not as a lost daughter returning home, but as a gift they had never expected to receive again. Maria, Carlos, and Sofia embraced me as the sister they had always known existed, but never thought they'd meet. I found work with a San Diego nonprofit organization doing investigative journalism on social justice issues, work that felt meaningful in a way my previous job never had. But the most healing part of my new life was simply feeling wanted. For the first time in 28 years, I was part of a family where my presence was celebrated rather than tolerated, where my opinions mattered, where my achievements were genuinely celebrated, where love wasn't conditional on performance or perfection. Jake proposed to me on the beach in La Jolla 6 months after I moved to California. As I said yes to spending my life with a man who had supported me through the most difficult period of my life, I thought about how different this moment felt from anything I could have imagined in my old life. This wasn't just about love, it was about being fully seen and accepted for who I really was. When we married the following spring, Elena walked me down the aisle while Michael waited to officiate our ceremony. He had gotten ordained online specifically for our wedding. Maria, Carlos, and Sofia stood as my attendants, and my extended Torres family filled the bride's side of the church. It was a celebration of love, but also of truth, authenticity, and the family bonds that matter most, the ones we choose and nurture, not just the ones we're born into. Delilah and Mason came to the wedding, and seeing them embrace Elena and my Torres siblings with genuine love and acceptance was a beautiful reminder that family isn't just about blood, it's about people who choose to love you unconditionally. They had chosen to be real family to me in a way Richard and Patricia never had. As for my adoptive parents, they weren't invited to the wedding, and I felt only peace about that decision. They had gotten exactly what they said they wanted, a family without me in it. The difference was that now, instead of being the family disappointment who never quite measured up, I was simply a woman who had found where she truly belonged. The last I heard, Richard and Patricia were trying to rebuild their lives in a smaller town in Vermont, away from the Connecticut community that had witnessed their disgrace. They had lost their perfect family, their social standing, and their reputations, but they had gained something they claimed to want: a family without their difficult, dramatic middle child. As I finish telling you this story, I'm sitting in my garden in San Diego watching my biological sister Sofia play with my 6-month-old daughter Isabella Elena Torres Rivera. Yes, I kept Elena's last name when I married Jake, who took Torres as his middle name to honor the family that welcomed him as enthusiastically as they welcomed me back. Isabella will grow up knowing she's loved unconditionally, knowing her family history truthfully, and knowing that family is about love, acceptance, and choosing to support each other through life's challenges. She'll never wonder if she belongs, or if her family would be better without her, because she'll be raised by people who understand that every child deserves to feel wanted and valued. Looking back on this journey from family disappointment to beloved daughter, I realized that the greatest revenge isn't always destruction. Sometimes it's simply living well, finding your tribe, and building the life you deserve. Richard and Patricia Morrison gave me one unintentional gift. They taught me exactly what kind of parent I never want to be. But tell me, have you ever experienced family betrayal or discovered that the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally were actually working against you? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes sharing our experiences helps us all heal from family trauma and build stronger, healthier relationships. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about family dynamics, justice, and finding your way back to yourself. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that they deserve better than conditional love, and that sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you're born into. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, your worth isn't determined by how others treat you. It's determined by how you choose to value yourself and surround yourself with people who see your true worth. May you all find the unconditional love and acceptance you deserve, whether that's within your birth family or in the family you create for yourself.